Pay attention to the young man in the dark hoodie aggressively pounding on this front door. His name is Devin Walker. He is 19 years old and was just released from juvenile detention after serving only 2 years for killing a woman. Now, pay attention to the man who opens the door. That's Mark Morrison, a 38-year-old insurance adjuster whose wife Sarah was the woman Devin killed. Devin is here to blame Mark for his prison time, to taunt him about his dead wife. What Mark doesn't know is that in the next 23 minutes, this confrontation will transform him from grieving victim to cold-blooded killer. Devin has come here believing he holds all the power, that Mark is just another broken man to intimidate. He's wrong. In less than half an hour, Devin will be dead on this very doorstep, and Mark will calmly sit beside his body, waiting for police to arrest him for murder. Sarah Elizabeth Chen Morrison had always believed in second chances. At 34, she had spent 11 years molding young minds at Millbrook Elementary School, often staying late to help struggling students with their reading assignments. Her colleagues knew her as the teacher who bought school supplies with her own money and kept granola bars in her desk for children who came to school hungry. Sarah had married her high school sweetheart Mark when she was 22, and their relationship had become the kind of steady, comfortable partnership that friends envied. The couple had spent the last 3 years trying to conceive, enduring the emotional roller coaster of fertility treatments and pregnancy losses that had tested but ultimately strengthened their bond. Just weeks before that fatal March evening, Sarah and Mark had made the decision to pursue adoption. They had attended their first orientation meeting and begun filling out the extensive paperwork required to become parents. Sarah kept the adoption agency brochures on her nightstand, often reading testimonials from other families during her evening routine. Mark Morrison embodied the reliable, methodical nature that made him successful as an insurance adjuster at Midwest Mutual. For 15 years, he had built a reputation for thorough investigations and fair settlements. His coworkers described him as unflappable, the kind of man who approached problems with spreadsheets and systematic analysis. At home, Mark handled the practical matters, while Sarah provided the emotional warmth that defined their household. He paid bills on time, maintained their modest 2-story house on Elm Street, and never missed one of Sarah's school performances or parent-teacher conferences where she was honored for her dedication. Their evening routines had become comfortable rituals over 12 years of marriage. Mark would arrive home from work at 5:30, change into casual clothes, and prepare dinner while Sarah finished grading papers at the kitchen table. After eating, Sarah would often make a quick trip to Millbrook Shopping Plaza for groceries or household necessities. Mark trusted her completely and never worried about these solo errands. Their neighborhood felt safe, and Sarah was careful about her surroundings. Meanwhile, across town in a different world entirely, 19-year-old Devin James Walker was struggling with demons that had plagued him since childhood. Born into poverty in East Cleveland, Devin had never known his father, who disappeared when Devin was 3 years old. His paternal grandmother, struggling with her own alcohol addiction, had raised him in a cramped apartment where utilities were frequently shut off for non-payment. Devin's learning disabilities had never been properly diagnosed or addressed as he moved between different schools, each transfer representing another failure of the system to recognize a child in desperate need of intervention. By age 14, Devin had been arrested for shoplifting, and his encounters with law enforcement escalated from there. Drug possession, truancy, and vandalism filled his juvenile record as he aged out of his grandmother's care and into the group home system. March 2019 found Devin living at Henderson House, a facility for at-risk youth where overworked counselors managed 30 residents with varying degrees of trauma and behavioral problems. Devin had been experimenting with methamphetamines, a habit that was making his already unpredictable behavior increasingly dangerous. The stolen Honda Civic that Devin had been driving for 3 days represented his latest poor decision in a series of escalating crimes. He had taken the vehicle from a hospital parking lot, reasoning that he needed transportation to job interviews that he had no intention of attending. The methamphetamines clouded his judgment and amplified his desperation, creating a volatile combination that would prove fatal. On March 15, 2019, none of these 3 people knew their lives were about to intersect in the most tragic way possible. Sarah left work that Tuesday evening, planning to pick up ingredients for Mark's favorite pasta dish. Mark was at home reviewing insurance files, expecting his wife to return within an hour. Devin was driving aimlessly through Millbrook, high, and looking for an opportunity to score quick cash or another vehicle to steal. The shopping plaza parking lot where their paths would cross seemed like any other unremarkable location in suburban Ohio, but it would soon become the scene of a senseless tragedy that would destroy multiple families and expose the failures of systems meant to protect society's most vulnerable members. At exactly 9:47 p.m. on March 15, 2019, security cameras captured the final moments of Sarah Morrison's life in stark, unforgiving detail. The footage from Millbrook Shopping Plaza shows Sarah methodically loading grocery bags into the back of her silver Honda Civic, completely unaware that Devin Walker was approaching in the stolen vehicle he had been driving for 3 days. Sarah had purchased ingredients for Mark's favorite carbonara pasta, along with coffee creamer and the whole grain bread she preferred for her school lunches. She moved with the efficient routine of someone who had made this same trip hundreds of times before. Devin's erratic driving pattern had been captured on multiple traffic cameras throughout the evening, as he cruised through suburban Millbrook under the influence of methamphetamines. The drug had heightened his paranoia while simultaneously impairing his judgment, creating a dangerous combination that made him increasingly desperate for quick transportation. When he spotted Sarah alone in the dimly lit parking lot, loading groceries into what appeared to be a newer, more reliable vehicle than his stolen Honda, Devin made the fatal decision to attempt a carjacking. The security footage reveals that Devin parked the stolen vehicle 3 spaces away and approached Sarah on foot while she was bent over, organizing bags in her trunk. When Sarah noticed his presence and turned around, Devin immediately demanded her car keys, producing no weapon but using his larger physical presence to intimidate her. Sarah's initial response was compliance. She reached into her purse for her keys, but something in Devin's demeanor, or perhaps her instinctive sense of self-preservation, caused her to hesitate and step back toward the rear of her vehicle. What happened next would haunt investigators for months. Rather than attempting to physically overpower Sarah or flee when she resisted, Devin made the impulsive decision to jump into the stolen Honda Civic and ram Sarah's vehicle while she was still positioned behind it. The impact knocked Sarah to the ground, but Devin's drug-addled state led him to believe she was still a threat to his escape. He reversed the vehicle, then accelerated forward again, this time striking Sarah directly and dragging her approximately 200 feet across the asphalt parking lot before her body finally separated from the vehicle. Store employees inside the plaza heard the commotion and rushed outside to find Sarah's broken body lying motionless near the loading zone. Devin had fled the scene immediately, abandoning both vehicles and disappearing on foot into the residential neighborhoods surrounding the shopping center. The first responders who arrived found Sarah alive but barely conscious, suffering from massive internal injuries, multiple fractures, and severe head trauma from being dragged across the rough pavement. Detective Linda Santos of the Millbrook Police Department took lead on what initially appeared to be a hit-and-run investigation. The security footage provided clear evidence that this was far more than a traffic accident, revealing a deliberate act of violence that had escalated from attempted robbery to vehicular assault. Physical evidence collected from the scene included paint transfer between the vehicles, blood evidence along Sarah's path of travel, and distinctive tire tracks that would later match the abandoned stolen Honda Civic. The abandoned stolen vehicle was discovered 3 miles away in a residential area, wiped clean of fingerprints, but containing trace evidence that would eventually connect Devin to the crime. For 48 hours, Devin managed to evade police by staying with acquaintances in East Cleveland and avoiding his known addresses. His capture came when a convenience store clerk recognized him from surveillance photos released to local media and called police. During those same 48 hours, Mark Morrison experienced every spouse's worst nightmare. When Sarah failed to return home by 10:30 p.m., Mark initially assumed she had encountered a friend or stopped at another store. By 11 p.m., his calls to her cell phone were going straight to voicemail, and Mark drove to the shopping plaza to look for her. He found police cars, ambulances, and crime scene tape cordoning off the parking lot where Sarah's blood still stained the asphalt. The hospital vigil that followed became 14 hours of agony as Sarah fought for her life in the intensive care unit. Mark never left her side, holding her hand while machines monitored her failing vital signs. Sarah briefly regained consciousness once, long enough to squeeze Mark's hand and whisper his name, before slipping back into the coma from which she would never recover. At 11:22 a.m. on March 16, 2019, Dr. Patricia Holloway pronounced Sarah Elizabeth Chen Morrison dead from her injuries, leaving Mark to begin a grief that would eventually consume his entire sense of justice and morality. The funeral drew over 400 attendees, including students, parents, teachers, and community members whose lives Sarah had touched during her years of service. Mark's victim impact statement during Devon's eventual sentencing would become a haunting testament to his transformation from grieving husband to something far more dangerous. "She died afraid and in pain," Mark told the juvenile court judge, and he just drove away like she was nothing more than an obstacle in his path. The juvenile court proceedings that followed Devon Walker's arrest would prove to be the catalyst for Mark Morrison's descent from grieving widower into something far more dangerous. Despite the severity of Sarah's death and the clear evidence of Devon's violent actions, Ohio law mandated that his case be processed through the juvenile justice system due to his age at the time of the crime. Judge Margaret Chen, no relation to Sarah despite the shared surname, presided over hearings that would expose every weakness in a system designed for rehabilitation rather than punishment of serious violent crimes. Devon's defense attorney, Patricia Vance, had built her career on advocating for troubled youth, and she approached his case with the same strategy that had secured lenient sentences for dozens of juvenile offenders. Vance argued that Devon's methamphetamine use had created a state of diminished capacity, making him unable to fully comprehend the consequences of his actions. She painted a portrait of a young man failed by every institution meant to protect him, from absent parents to underfunded schools to overwhelmed social services. Devon's grandmother testified tearfully about his childhood trauma, pleading with the court to see her grandson as a victim of circumstances rather than a cold-blooded killer. Prosecutor James Matthews found himself constrained by juvenile court limitations that prevented him from seeking the life sentence he believed Devon deserved. The maximum penalty available under Ohio juvenile law was detention until age 21, a mere 3 years for taking Sarah's life. Matthews presented the security footage and physical evidence methodically, hoping to convince Judge Chen that Devon's actions warranted the harshest possible sentence within the court's limited jurisdiction. The prosecution's case was strong, but ultimately irrelevant given the structural limitations of juvenile justice. The plea agreement reached after 6 months of hearings sentenced Devon to 24 months in Lakewood Juvenile Facility for involuntary manslaughter, with credit for time served and the possibility of early release for good behavior. Mark Morrison sat in the courtroom gallery as Judge Chen announced the sentence, his face showing no emotion as the mathematical reality sank in. 24 months for Sarah's life. Less than 1 month of detention for each year Sarah had been alive. Mark's initial response to the lenient sentence was shock that quickly transformed into advocacy. He joined Ohio Voices for Victims' Rights and began speaking at legislative hearings about juvenile justice reform. Mark appeared on local news programs sharing Sarah's story and arguing for mandatory adult prosecution of violent juvenile offenders. His articulate presentations and obvious grief made him an effective spokesman for victims' families who felt abandoned by a system that prioritized rehabilitation over accountability. During this advocacy phase, Mark seemed to channel his grief into productive activism. He formed relationships with other families whose loved ones had been killed by juvenile offenders, and together they lobbied state legislators for changes to Ohio's juvenile justice laws. Mark's colleagues at Midwest Mutual noticed his renewed sense of purpose and assumed he was processing his grief in a healthy way. They were wrong. Behind the public facade of constructive activism, Mark had begun a private investigation into Devon's activities that would consume his every waking moment. Mark hired private investigator Robert Chen to monitor Devon's behavior in the Lakewood Juvenile Facility. The monthly reports detailed Devon's disciplinary infractions, his participation in counseling programs, and most disturbing to Mark, his apparent lack of genuine remorse for Sarah's death. Devon had been overheard telling other residents that his victim should have just given up her keys and that he was being punished for an accident. The reports documented Devon's plans to settle scores with people he blamed for his incarceration, including Mark himself. Mark's therapy sessions with Dr. Elizabeth Santos revealed a man whose grief was curdling into something much darker. Audio recordings from these sessions, later obtained by police, captured Mark's increasingly violent fantasies about confronting Devon upon his release. Dr. Santos noted Mark's obsessive behavior, his detailed planning of hypothetical scenarios, and his growing belief that the justice system had failed both him and Sarah so completely that personal action had become necessary. As Devon's release date approached in August 2021, Mark's behavior became increasingly erratic. He purchased a Glock 19 handgun and obtained a concealed carry permit, claiming he needed protection from Devon's threats. Mark's journal entries from this period revealed elaborate plans for surveillance and confrontation, including detailed maps of Devon's expected release location and his grandmother's address. The final entry, written the day before Devon's release, contained a simple statement that would later be cited as evidence of premeditation. "Tomorrow, I make things right for Sarah." Devon Walker's 26 months at Lakewood Juvenile Facility had done little to address the underlying issues that led to Sarah's death. Counseling sessions revealed a young man who blamed everyone except himself for his circumstances, including Sarah for resisting his carjacking attempt. Social media posts made from contraband phones showed Devon expressing anger about his sentence and making vague threats about revenge against those who had destroyed his life. His release on August 1st, 2021, put him back on the streets with no meaningful rehabilitation, no job prospects, and a burning resentment that would prove fatal within 72 hours. August 3rd, 2021 began with Devon Walker posting a series of social media messages that would later be analyzed by investigators as evidence of his intent to confront Mark Morrison. From his grandmother's apartment in East Cleveland, Devon uploaded photos of himself with captions celebrating his freedom and hinting at unfinished business. One post featured a selfie with the text, "Time to visit some people who think they ruined my life." Another showed Devon sitting in the same Honda Civic he had driven to kill Sarah, captioned, "Back to Millbrook today to handle some business." These posts were seen by dozens of his social media followers, yet no one contacted authorities about their threatening nature. Mark Morrison's behavior at work that day struck his colleagues as unnaturally calm, a stark contrast to the agitated state he had displayed for months leading up to Devon's release. Insurance adjuster Rebecca Thompson later told investigators that Mark seemed peaceful for the first time in years, completing his case files with unusual efficiency and even making small talk about weekend plans he would never see. Mark left the Midwest Mutual offices at precisely 4:30 p.m., telling his supervisor he had personal matters to attend to. Security footage from his office building shows Mark walking to his car with the measured gait of someone who had made a final decision about something of grave importance. At 7:20 p.m., neighborhood security cameras captured Devon's Honda Civic turning onto Elm Street, driving slowly past house numbers until reaching 1247. The vehicle parked directly in front of the Morrison residence, and Devon sat inside for several minutes, appearing to check his phone and survey the property. Across the street surveillance shows Devon eventually exiting his car and walking purposefully toward Mark's front door, his body language displaying the aggressive confidence of someone who believed he held all the power in what was about to unfold. The Ring doorbell camera at 1247 Elm Street captured every moment of the 23-minute confrontation that would end with Devon's death. At 7:26 p.m., Devon began aggressively pressing the doorbell multiple times before pounding on the door with his fist. When Mark opened the door, Devon immediately launched into a vicious verbal assault, pointing his finger accusingly while shouting about how Mark had ruined his life by pressing charges. The audio captured Devon's exact words: "Your dead wife got what she deserved, and you destroyed my life over some stupid accident." Devon's tirade escalated as he blamed Mark for his prison sentence, claiming that Sarah should have simply given up her car keys instead of fighting back. He threatened to burn down Mark's house and specifically mentioned harming Mark's elderly mother, who lived 3 blocks away. The doorbell footage shows Mark stepping back into his house briefly, his face displaying no emotion as Devon continued screaming threats from the porch. This retreat lasted approximately 90 seconds, during which Mark retrieved his loaded Glock 19 from the bedroom safe, where he had kept it since obtaining his concealed carry permit. When Mark returned to the doorway, Devin had begun attempting to force entry by throwing his shoulder against the doorframe. The teenager's drug-fueled aggression had reached a crescendo as he tried to push past Mark into the house while continuing his verbal assault. Mark's response was swift and decisive. The doorbell camera captured the moment Mark raised the handgun and fired 2 shots into Devin's chest at close range. Devin collapsed immediately on the doorstep, his body partially blocking the door from closing. What happened next would become one of the most haunting aspects of the entire case. Mark Morrison calmly placed his weapon on the porch railing and sat down on the front steps beside Devin's motionless body. Security footage from across the street shows Mark removing his cell phone and making what investigators later confirmed was a 911 call lasting 4 minutes and 17 seconds. During this call, Mark's voice remained steady as he confessed to killing Devin and provided his address for responding officers. For the next 47 minutes, Mark remained seated on his porch steps, occasionally checking Devin's pulse, but otherwise sitting motionless beside the body. Neighbor Jennifer Walsh, who witnessed the aftermath from her upstairs window, later described Mark as appearing more at peace than I had seen him since Sarah died. The scene was surreal in its calmness, with Mark occasionally looking up at the evening sky, while emergency sirens grew closer in the distance. Police units arrived at 8:36 p.m. to find Mark Morrison sitting exactly where he had been for nearly an hour. Body camera footage shows Mark slowly standing with his hands raised as officers approached, his demeanor cooperative and resigned. When Officer Patricia Chen asked if he had any weapons, Mark calmly pointed to the Glock on the porch railing and stated, "I shot him twice in the chest. He came here to threaten me about my dead wife." Mark offered no resistance during his arrest and made no attempt to justify his actions beyond stating that Devin had deserved to die for what he did to Sarah. The crime scene investigation that followed revealed no evidence that Mark had attempted to conceal his actions or flee after the shooting. The weapon remained where he had placed it, loaded with 8 remaining rounds in the magazine. Devin's body showed no defensive wounds, indicating the shooting had been swift and decisive, rather than the result of a physical struggle. The Millbrook County Prosecutor's Office faced a complex decision when charging Mark Morrison with Devin Walker's death. Despite the clear evidence of premeditation found in Mark's journals and private investigator reports, Prosecutor Amanda Chen recognized that public sentiment strongly favored the grieving widower who had taken justice into his own hands. After 2 weeks of deliberation, Chen filed charges of first-degree murder, arguing that Mark's extensive planning and weapon purchase demonstrated clear intent to kill Devin, regardless of the circumstances of their confrontation. Mark's defense team, led by veteran criminal attorney Robert Santos, built their strategy around temporary insanity and extreme emotional disturbance. Santos argued that Mark's actions were the result of prolonged psychological trauma from losing his wife and witnessing the juvenile justice system's failure to provide adequate punishment for her killer. The defense presented expert testimony from forensic psychiatrists who diagnosed Mark with severe post-traumatic stress disorder and complicated grief that had impaired his judgment on the night of August 3, 2021. The trial began on March 14, 2022, almost exactly 3 years after Sarah's death, with intense media coverage that divided public opinion between those who saw Mark as a vigilante hero and others who viewed him as a cold-blooded murderer. Jury selection took 6 days as attorneys struggled to find 12 impartial citizens in a case that had dominated local news cycles for months. The final jury consisted of 8 women and 4 men, including 3 parents who had lost children and 2 individuals who had been victims of violent crime themselves. Prosecutor Chen's opening statement methodically outlined the evidence of premeditation, including Mark's weapon purchase, private investigator reports, and journal entries detailing plans for confronting Devin. She argued that while Mark's grief was understandable, it could not justify taking the law into his own hands and executing a 19-year-old man. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the timing of Mark's actions, pointing out that he had retrieved his weapon during the confrontation rather than acting purely in self-defense. The defense countered with testimony about Mark's previously spotless character and the inadequacy of Devin's punishment for Sarah's death. Santos called Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a trauma specialist, who testified that Mark exhibited classic symptoms of someone whose mental state had been shattered by loss and system failure. The defense also presented evidence of Devin's threatening social media posts and his history of violent behavior, arguing that Mark reasonably feared for his safety when confronted by his wife's killer. Mark's testimony lasted 5 hours and proved to be the most compelling moment of the trial. Speaking in the same calm, measured tone he had used during his 911 call, Mark described the months of anguish following Sarah's death and his growing realization that Devin felt no genuine remorse for his actions. When asked if he regretted killing Devin, Mark's response sent shockwaves through the courtroom. "I regret that it took so long. Sarah deserved justice, and since the courts wouldn't provide it, I did." Devin's grandmother, Martha Walker, provided the most heartbreaking testimony of the trial when she spoke about losing the grandson she had raised despite his troubled behavior. Through tears, she described Devin as a child who had never received the help he needed and argued that his death represented another failure of society to protect its most vulnerable members. Her plea for justice moved several jurors to tears, but ultimately could not overcome the weight of evidence against Mark. The guilty verdict on first-degree murder came after 18 hours of jury deliberation over 3 days. The jury rejected the temporary insanity defense, but acknowledged mitigating circumstances in their recommendation for sentencing. Judge Patricia Holloway sentenced Mark Morrison to 25 years to life in prison with eligibility for parole after 20 years, citing the premeditated nature of the crime while acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances that led to Devin's death. Mark's statement at sentencing became his final public declaration about his actions. Looking directly at Devin's family members in the courtroom gallery, Mark said, "I am sorry for your loss, but I am not sorry for what I did. Devin Walker killed my wife and showed no remorse. The system failed both of us, but only one of us paid the price until now." 3 years later, Mark Morrison serves his sentence at Ohio State Penitentiary, where correctional officers describe him as a model inmate who spends his time reading legal texts and corresponding with victims' rights advocates. His first parole hearing in 2024 was denied after he refused to express remorse for his actions, telling the parole board that he would make the same choice again under identical circumstances. Devin's grandmother, Martha Walker, died in January 2023, never having recovered emotionally from losing her grandson. She spent her final years advocating for restorative justice programs that might have saved both Devin and Mark from their tragic collision course. The modest funeral service was attended by social workers and community advocates who had tried unsuccessfully to help Devin during his troubled youth. Sarah Morrison's legacy lives on through an annual memorial scholarship established at Millbrook Elementary School, where a garden planted in her memory provides a peaceful space for students and teachers. The school district has also implemented new safety protocols and victim support services inspired by Sarah's story and the community's recognition of how tragedy can ripple through interconnected lives. The house at 1240 Hacienda Elm Street was sold by Mark's family in 2022 to buyers who were unaware of its violent history. The current residents have reported no unusual incidents, though neighbors occasionally point out the property to visitors as the site where justice and vengeance became tragically indistinguishable from one another.